Okay, today we're painting a Blood Angels Chaplain. Get straight into it. Okay, we've already got a zenithal prime on this, but what we're going to do is we're going to go back in with some pure titanium white, and we're going to get some of those sharper edges, and we're going to really make them pop. It doesn't matter about the light direction here. We want to look like the edges of the material are slightly frayed and a bit whiter. So we're also going to put in some scratches with some tiny brush strokes. We're going to work on the sharper edges of the head as well. Now, using a well-loaded brush, we're just going to use Blood Angels contrast paint to cover the entire coat, making sure we get all the little details but keeping it nice and even. So quick, even brush strokes. Being careful not to cover up any of the other details and avoiding pooling by working in large sections at once. As you can see here, we're getting a slightly brighter feel to the edges where we left that titanium white. And it's going to give the cloak some space. Same thing on the head, we're keeping that separate just because we want to make sure that we get a good cover on it and that we can get to some of the details behind the power pack. We're doing the armour next. We're using Black Legion contrast paint. We're just going to give everything a nice even coat, quickly and efficiently, working into all those corners and avoiding pooling. You may have noticed there I've also decided to go with Blood Angels red on the shoulder pauldrons, just because I think it gives it a little bit more colour variety, really makes the model stand out. But continuing with the Black Legion, we're getting the arms, then we're also getting the power pack. There's no areas of the head to get with this. Bit more contrast paint. We're going to be using Sigval Burgundy just for the handle of his Crozius. We like that red, but we want it to be a little defined from the cloak, so we're going with a slightly deeper red here. Okay, getting onto the details for the head, because we want to try and wrap this up as quickly as we can. I'm using some slightly watered down Warpstone Glow to get into the details around his eyes, because I want them to be green but without being too intense, because the angle of the head means you can't quite see the eyes on this model. And what I like on it is if I paint this in a subtle enough but bright enough green, when you tip the model back just that little bit, it's going to look like his eyes are lighting up. Lead Belcher, we're going to use it for some of the details, but not all of them, because we're also going to be using some Retributor Gold for the more fancy parts of his accessories. But for some, just the basic chains and the base of his Crozius staff, we're using Lead Belcher to give us that nice metallic base. Covering the entire weapon in Lead Belcher as well. We're going to give this some variety later with some red, but for now this Lead Belcher is going to make those next coats a little brighter, but also mean that we get all the details underneath them as well. Bit to the power pack, I like to get the exhaust and inlet ports, as I assume they are, on the power pack in Leadbelcher as well. Wraithbone for all of the parchment and paper style areas of the model. I like to use the Wraithbone because it's got a slightly richer yellowy colour to it, so it's easier to make this look a little bit more aged later. Might need a couple of coats of this because sometimes it can be a little difficult to apply, but just make sure to water down your paint so you get a nice even coat each time. Just remember to also pick up those little details with the Wraithbone. So we've got the purity seals, or just the one that he has here, and also this small scroll on his shoulder. And lastly, with the Wraithbone, we're getting those bones on his chest piece. I think this is a really nice feature of this model. Okay, for these leather areas, there's not too many on the model, so we're not going to work too hard on them. We're just going to use some Garagax sewer to give them a little bit of definition. We'll come back and re-highlight this a little later. But for now, we'll just make sure we get the belt, gun pouches, but we're not doing the exterior of the book in this. The exterior of the book, the outside cover, we're going to be using Rhinox hide. I want this lovely deep rich brown because it's going to really pop when I do some of these details in gold a little later. Okay, Retributor armor for all of the gold details. There's quite a few on this model, so just take your time, be careful, try not to get it into anywhere we've already painted with the contrast paint, because those could be quite difficult to touch up. But for now, we're getting all of his little fancy accessories, being super careful here on this one because I just want the highest points to be in gold, because it's going to make it easier to give detail to those deep recesses later if I haven't clogged it all up with gold paint. The top of the crow's ears as well now here. So many gold details, just being careful. Make sure to keep it all nice and even. These tiny little loops at the end of his super long purity seals as well. Taking extra care not to get it into anywhere that we don't want it to be. But we can always fix it by coming back with the base colours if we absolutely have to. The edges of the pauldrons as well. I've always found these quite challenging because I always find that if you go just a little bit over, your eye sees that imperfection in the line, and suddenly you caught yourself in this horrible game of going backward and forward between the pauldron colour, the edging colour, and now the buttons on his cloak. Tiny details, being super careful and super delicate with the brush. just letting the paint flow gently off the tip to get to the details we want to be. Last but not least, that big old halo on the power pack, which really makes this this model pop. It's a good bit of contrast, good opportunity for some bright versus dark right there above the head where we want the focus of the model to be. Mephiston red for some of the casing here on the weapon. Now the reason I'm using Mephiston red and not Blood Angels red is because I just want there to be some definition between the model itself and his accessories, so his weapon and his Croceus, his staff. That's why I've used these different reds, so they all tie together nicely, but we're still getting a little bit of separation. I'm being careful here not to cover any of the parts that we want to remain as metal, and then just carefully picking out the areas of the casing that we think we want to look just a little bit extra. I'm also just getting the purity seal here in Mephiston red, again just to differentiate it from the cloak. Okay, here I've taken some Vallejo pink, mixed it in with the Mephiston red. It's about equal measures, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it along some of the edges of the cloak. And the reason I want to do this is I want to make the cloak look quite rich, and I want that material to look quite fancy. So I'm going to run it along the edges, and that's going to brine it up, so it's giving the material this lovely luxurious feel without getting too into the weeds on details. This isn't some huge character model, so we don't want to be spending hours and hours on it, but what we can do is just give it a little bit of life. Going in on the hood as well here onto some of those sharp edges, and that's going to add more contrast up there, so a good focal point for the model. Now unfortunately I had a bit of a problem here. The final stages of the painting process were corrupted in the file, so I'm just going to run you through some of the details of what I've got for the final bits and pieces. Obviously what I've done is I've attached the head. I've also given the wraithbone areas a wash in Seraphim Sepia to give them some shape, and I used a tiny little marker pen that I used to use for making comic books just to put those little scribbles on there. I've also put in some very slight dry brushing with Necron compound on the black armor, just to give it some shape without making it look too weathered and too edge highlighty, which I'm not a big fan of. I've put in some Liberator gold highlights onto the gold areas just to make them a little bit shinier, a little bit more pop, and that same Mephiston red and Vallejo pink mix, I used that just to put a slight highlight on his staff. On the base I've stacked up some cork. It's nothing too difficult, it's just glued together. Then I've painted that in Rhinox hide, dry brushed that in XV88, and then given that an even lighter dry brushing of Zamizi Desert, stuck on a shrub, painted the edge in black. So didn't miss out on too much. It's just unfortunate I didn't have all the video footage to show you, but I think it came out looking really good here. The dramatic lighting really helps sells it, and all in all, a fun model to paint, and I hope this has helped. Give us a like and a subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next one.